Good evening. This is the first installment in a currently 8-video series titled Real Railroads. This video is just a simple discussion talking about different real-life railroads. In this instance, Real Railroads Episode 1, we'll be discussing the Scottsville LeRoy Railroad. Now, this is one that you may have heard of, you may have not heard of. Most of you will not have heard of it because it was not around very long. It was not a very long railroad. This series is currently 8 parts, and it will be a weekly series, hopefully filmed every Tuesday or Wednesday, hopefully. There might be a week that it can't be done because I'm filming these while my mom is out doing stuff, and if that gets canceled, I don't have a chance to be in the house with it quiet enough to film without an interruption. So that's contingent on whether she's in the house or not. So future episodes, other than the 8 weeks that I have planned out, will depend on how well all videos on the channel perform. Right now, I'm not sure what to think about that. I have my camera holding my phone steady. So let's get into talking about the Scottsville LeRoy Railroad. This only ran about 4 years. When the first Tonawanda Railroad was being constructed, it was discussed that on its route from Rochester, New York to Batavia, New York, it would go south to Mumford, Caledonia, and LeRoy before going to Batavia. This involves going from Rochester down and then southwest and then down to Scottsville and over to Mumford and Caledonia and such. I might be doing that backwards. It's difficult because it's mirrored for me. That did not happen. They instead favored a more direct route. We went from Chilai basically straight west to Batavia, going through Bergen and Byron and that. Naturally, the businessmen in Scottsville, Mumford, and Caledonia were a little upset about that. Even though this was 1830s, railroads were in their infancy in the United States at that time, they still recognized that railroads were the way of the future, and if they were going to compete in a then modern economy, they needed rail service. At this time in history, Scottsville, Mumford, Caledonia, and that area was filled with mills. Freight had to be hauled by wagon to Owatka Creek, loaded onto canal boats, and then went up to the Genesee River to Rochester and to the Erie Canal. On December 3rd, 1835, an agreement was made with Powell Carpenter, Philip Garbett, John McNaughton, and E.H.S. Mumford to get estimates for a railroad route that would parallel Owatka Creek. On December 24th, 1835, a meeting with residents of the town of Wheatland interested in a railroad being built saw Alvin Savage report the route he had been hired to survey as practicable. On January 9, 1836, another meeting was held to form the railroad and to add Caledonia to the route plan, which was intended to go between Scottsville and Mumford solely within the town of Wheatland. On March 5, 1836, they hired engineer William Wallace, not that William Wallace, to build the railroad at the wage of $3.50 a day. The railroad was chartered in May of that year to run from Scottsville through Mumford and Caledonia to terminate in LeRoy. It is possible the plan was actually to go to Batavia after LeRoy, a total run of 26 miles, a very ambitious plan that never happened. In April 1836, it was decided to build another railroad from Scottsville to Canandaigua. This would have connected the railroad then being built from Auburn to Canandaigua. At this point, the railroads that would later make up the New York Central were being built across the state, connecting cities and larger villages. Research leads me to believe that their intent was to be part of the cross-state route, linking Batavia with Honeoye, as the route between Canandaigua and Rochester was being planned. Linking Batavia with Honeoye as the route between Canandaigua and Rochester was being planned to go to Honeoye and then turn north to reach Rochester. That would have made Rochester being a branch line and the main line going straight across. To connect to this, they only would need to cross the Genesee River. Sadly, it was not to be. The route was surveyed, but the ambitious project was not built to that size. In September 1838, the Scottsville LeRoy Railroad was completed from Caledonia to Scottsville. It ran from E.T. Miller's warehouse, past the mills in Scottsville, through fields to Philip Garbutt's store. Here it ran through a trench under the store's platform to load and unload right into the basement. So it was below ground. It was in a trench, quite possibly one of the earliest examples of railroads in a trench. It then ran through fields paralleling the route that would later be the Baltimore-Ohio Railroad. At Mumford, it turned south, crossed the creek on a bridge, and ended near the old Caledonia School. Construction was primitive. Oak timbers with grooves cut in the top were laid with narrow strips of oak spiked down to serve as rails. The only iron used was at grade crossings. These oak rails became the biggest problem the railroad had. This, like strap iron rails, the way the wagons on the railroad would cause the oak strips to come up and go through the wagons. The wood rails wore out, causing derailments. The spikes were pretty much ineffective. The railroad was basically a disaster from a construction standpoint. The route was easy to construct. No blasting was needed. No fills were made. The tightest curve was 1,200-foot radius, with the steepest grade being 0.68%, or 36 feet per mile. The bridge across the creek was 100 feet long. The roadbed was 12 feet wide on average, and ties were laid 4 feet apart. Now, the gauge was not 12 feet. The roadbed itself was 12 feet. Construction was about $4,000 per mile, $32,000 for 8 miles of railroad. The Scottsville and LeRoy had 2 passenger coaches, but these were pretty much only used by Clark Hall and his family to go to church in Scottsville on Sundays. Only used to church on Sundays. Really, though. A survey was made to extend the railroad to LeRoy and on to Batavia, but was never acted on. Another plan to extend it to Tomlinson's Mills, south of LeRoy. Survey was to extend it to LeRoy, was never acted on. Another plan to extend it to Tomlinson's Mills, which is south of LeRoy, and then to Batavia, also never happened. Operations were wagons with iron axles and plank wheels pulled by horses. No locomotives were ever acquired, and I highly doubt the light construction would have handled the weight of locomotives, even back then. The railroad was successful, despite its problems with rails carrying flour from Caledonia and Mumford, Wheatland Center, and Garbutt to Scottsville, where it was loaded onto boats on the creek, and then went via the Scottsville-Genesee River Canal, which was part of Oaxaca Creek, to the Genesee River and north to Rochester and the Erie Canal. However, this would soon change. The Genesee Valley Canal was coming. In 1840, the new canal was completed, and new warehouses were built along it and on an island that was made by the construction of the canal. The Scottsville and LeRoy Railroad couldn't reach the island because the downward grade was too steep, and bringing the freight from the railroad terminus to the canal was too expensive. The cost of operation was too great. The weight of 80 barrels of flour into a train of 4 cars caused the flange to cut into the rails and derail the train. The canal, plus the cost and problems of the Scottsville and LeRoy Railroad, led to its shutting down around 1840. The railroad would come later. The Rochester and State Line would build through connecting Scottsville, Mumford, Caledonia, and LeRoy to all the Rochester in the world by rail in 1874. Also, predecessor to the New York Central would build through Caledonia. That became the Peanut Line. Lehigh Valley came through that area. The Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western. The Erie. They're all in that area. But those will be covered in future videos. Maybe. The next video will be next week, will be episode 2, Forming the New York Central. That will be on the predecessor railroads that made up the New York Central, the ones that all were built, were slightly mentioned in this episode. And we'll see how well this video does, and yeah. And the other 7, I don't have everything decided. I have just 8 titles. All these videos I am working off a script, so you'll see me looking beyond the camera. And I have episode 2 will be Forming the New York Central. Episode 3 is on the Rochester and State Line. Episode 4 is on the Arcade and Attica. Episode 5 is on Forming the Erie Railroad. Episode 6 on the Genesee Wyoming Beginnings. Episode 7 is on Major Mergers in North America. That is one that will be especially interesting to people. Maybe I'll put that as episode 2. I don't know. I could change them around. And episode 8 is Conrail, New York. Sparky would love that one, if he doesn't know it already. But that's it. This is a 12-minute video now. Hopefully people have watched it all the way through. Yeah. Bye.